profissionais de marketing e comerciais, eu capturo toda a sua atenção aqui agora, que nós vamos falar um pouquinho de funil, né? Como é que a gente adquire um tráfego, como é que a gente trabalha essa audiência, e olha como a gente olha essa jornada desse cliente entrando através de qualquer meio para interagir com uma marca e garantir que todos os touch points estão coletando os dados corretos para que a gente possa trabalhar isso através de uma fidelização futura, né? Como é que eu vou adequar isso perante a um CRM e quais métricas e indicadores a gente mede para garantir a eficiência e a rentabilidade dessa operação. Então, acho que pensando nesse tema e trazer alguém aqui para poder, de alto calibre, nós resolvemos buscar globalmente um head de marketing e tecnologia que tem uma ampla experiência em marcas globais, como a Edelman, Kimberly Clark, e já esteve conosco aqui também no Fórum em Santa Catarina em 2018, e hoje ele lidera globalmente todas as campanhas da Philip Morris. E lá do interior da Suíça, diretamente de Lausanne, eu queria convidar o Anthony Long para vir falar para a gente da ciência dos dados como um novo negócio, nesse trabalho da jornada, e para explorar um pouquinho os KPIs que ele mede e como é que ele entrega esses takeaways aí para a gente aprender com uma marca tão representativa. Agora eu vou mudar para inglês. I'll switch to English, and I would like to invite Tony Longdon to enjoy the 11th edition of the Global Edition Fórum E-commerce Brasil. Please welcome.
Hello, how's everybody doing? My brothers and sisters of Fórum E-commerce Brasil 2020. I genuinely thank you for letting me join you today. As stated, my name is Tony Long, and I'm the Global Head of Consumer Engagement for Philip Morris International in Lausanne, Switzerland. And today we're going to be talking about how data is the new merchandising, about media spend, about engagement, and selling more things to more people more often. We haven't been together since 2018, which is an eternity, really, in digital marketing. We have been staying in touch through my column called Future Shopping in E-commerce Brazil magazine, which I'm very, very grateful for the whole team to let me stay to be part of. And I think the format of this meeting is really indicative of the very remarkable times that we live in. I think it's unfortunate that we can still get together this way, we can still exchange ideas. And I think we want to focus on hearing more about what works, but also we want to think about what needs to be broken. And then we want to explore new ways we can put it all back together. Because it really, that's what COVID-19 has done for retail. You remember way back when my 21-year-old daughter was 1 year old, the internet was going to be the big disruptor of retail. And did that happen? No. What did happen was that the internet tested retail. It nudged retail into new, more uncomfortable places. It opened the door for innovative merchants to find new ways to engage shoppers. And it stress tested the stamina of those retailers that elected not to keep up. But as I've shown you in previous talks, the internet never really killed retail. And not even COVID-19 could kill retail, because people still need and they want to shop. But what COVID-19 did do was to finally do what the internet could not do for itself, which is to break the norms of how people go shopping. It forced people, reluctant people, inexperienced people, unprepared people, to shift their preferred commerce channels to digital. And the numbers bear this all out. You can see that Brazilian e-commerce has risen by 56.8% in the first 5 months of 2020 from the year before. You can see that there have been other gains as well. And so the idea is that the number of online orders has grown as well has grown by 65.7%. And in a study that by MindMinders and Bain of April of this year, 27% of people are using more online delivery services than ever before. There we go. Now we're all caught up. So this leaves retailers and brands with a very interesting challenge. How do we, in this sort of new normal, handle all these online shoppers? You can't just spend more to get them, because although e-commerce sales have jumped, overall sales are down. Right? So you need to merchandise more effectively than ever before. Ad budgets are being slashed, but you still need to be in front of consumers so they know that you're there. And your average online basket value has remained pretty flat through all of this, but is that truly where it should be? So whenever I say that there's an interesting challenge, you should put on your helmet and you should fasten your seatbelts, because interesting to a guy like me is usually almost life-threatening to a brand or a retailer. Just a quick word from a friend. So today's very, very rapid fire conversation is going to be in 3 parts. First, we're going to say, if this, then that. Second, we're going to look at a guy named John Wanamaker and one of his original thoughts. And third, we're going to talk about something all my Brazilian brothers and sisters love, coffee. But first, let's talk about spaghetti. And the reason why we're going to talk about spaghetti is because tracking the path that is generated by consumer inquiry, those steps before they actually buy something, is kind of like tracing back through a plate of pasta. I mean, if you look at it, you don't know where it starts or where it ends. But my question to you is, what does it really matter? Just grab one of those noodles, pull it out, then grab the next one, and pull it out, line it up, and repeat until you get to the end. Because once you've done this, you have something that looks a little bit more orderly. And this is kind of a neat visualization, I think, of basic segmentation. You can regroup those strands of pasta however you see fit. But what once seemed like an entangled mess actually is a rather neat bite-sized grouping of individual threads. And they represent segments for which you can develop targeted experiences. Because the world was a very different place before we had data. Before we had data, retailers were allowed to plan displays, promotions, and other incentives pretty much however they wanted. So that in this way, each retailer developed its own unique character, right? So you might think that maybe data has ruined merchandising. So we should probably answer that question first, right? And this is what I could call if then this, then that. The notion of data-driven personal shopping, because retail in the era before, since the birth of the superstore or the large retail chain, retail has been built on data. And so while this is largely good, it falters in a couple of key areas. First of all, data exists only in the ecosystem of the retailer. Retail data begins and ends at checkout. The retailer is accustomed to kind of not exactly knowing what happens before the sale and not exactly what happens afterwards unless there's a return. And that merchandising is built on trailing indicators, right? What seemed to work in the past may or may not have a causal effect on sales. Now, retailers out in the audience today may strongly disagree with one or more of those bullet points. But the fact is this: until retailers and brands share data freely between each other, it remains a walled garden. And so the notion of what happens in the life of the consumer before the consumer makes a purchase and then after the consumer makes the purchase is still a little bit in the dark, right? And so let's take a case study. A retailer did a special aisle interrupter at a particular item at a special price. They blew through the inventory, high fives all around. But what was it that actually worked? Was it the placement in the store? Was it the price? Or was it the pressure of limitation? And so you can see the problem. Ernst & Young published way back in like 2015 that stores are the places for experiences and for covering the last mile. And so as digital marketers, and retailers, we have to ask ourselves, how do we replace that vital experience in a world where some shoppers are now starting to forego the aisles, right? Well, what you do is you use data based on the consumer's last action to help guide their next action. And even in some cases, if that last action didn't happen on your own channels, you can still take over. And what you do is you're taking the notion of merchandising and refining it with personalization. And let me explain. You have a regular consumer that's a habitual shopper, sticking with a few key brands. When they arrive at your online store for their next trip, add those items that they usually buy to a prioritized place on the landing page. You could replace the standard hero message in a communication with something that's customized to them with an urgent call to action. You can add some relevant content that doesn't even have a particular call to action if you want to, but that can be easily shared by the consumer to a friend. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. You can make that consumer's landing page completely custom to them with an if this, then that, with specially curated content that will compel them to take a look at what you're doing. It's basically like a custom shopping aisle just for you. Or you could consider a CRM-driven subscription capability where you use CRM just to trigger a reorder. The bottom line is, in this time and in this era of how people are going online and shopping, retailers are actually probably most at risk. when a consumer explores alternatives, because a shift in brand preference in the online world also impacts retailer preference as well. Data enables retailers to keep winning the hearts and minds and the wallets, frankly, of consumers by understanding their needs and delivering them. So retailers, when they shift to a certain extent to what a consumer is looking for, they help keep things fresh in the relationship. And the notion of relationship is very, very important, because retailers don't sell products to statistics. They sell products to people, and you have to know what those people want to buy in order to maintain that relationship, which brings us to John Wanamaker. So this guy's pretty amazing, because he was one of the first, he was the first actually, to actually advertise specific products and offers in the newspapers in his hometown in Philadelphia. And he was a huge music lover. So he built this gigantic organ and had it put in the store and would have music playing, live music from the organ. So he was really the first guy to embrace the notion of experiential retail. And this is his famous quote: "Half the money I spent on advertising is wasted. The trouble is, I don't know which half." So now let's level set a little bit, because nobody will ever tell you that advertising doesn't work. Well, actually, everybody will tell you that, but you do it anyway. So how do we make it work for you, right? Because when times get challenging, we really can't afford the luxury of knowingly wasting half our ad budget. And this is where the notion of data-driven content marketing comes in. And this is an overview of how data-driven content marketing works, but let's take it apart a little bit. The most important thing you have is measuring the transaction. And the reason why you want to measure a transaction, because that's the only real KPI when it comes to paid media. What's measurable? What did you gain that shows up on the P&L? What can be put on the balance sheet? You can pursue softer objectives, but data-driven content marketing needs to be focused on objectives that bring tangible returns. And so to do data-driven marketing, we need four things. We need consumer insights. What are these people's preferred behaviors and what are their attitudes? We need an appropriate number of consumer archetypes. What types of people should we be targeting and what types of people should we omit? We need a place to display the content. Where should you publish this stuff? And finally, content itself. What are you going to say? And you'll notice with that green arrow that somebody has purchased an ad unit against some data-driven content that we've put in place. So they're basically leveraging off of our segmentation, which itself is kind of interesting. So we're going to start with number 4, the content itself, because in my experience, this is where people are most challenged. Most of us are not content machines. So we don't necessarily feel like we have a library of snappy, shareable, share-worthy content, right? But if you don't have a lot of content to share, you need to develop or rent content that addresses consumer pain points or misperceptions. And the way that you get there is by leveraging product reviews and things like that, at which point you can proceed directly to number 1 to help you with this. And number 1 is consumer insights, and they lead you toward the right kind of content that will drive the desired action. So where do you get these insights from? You start with your own properties, your blogs, your ebooks, your white papers, your social posts, and you see how well these have performed with opens and shares and likes. This is the same. You look at which parts of your site people are visiting and what they're reading. If you are more curious, you have a specific area you want to pursue, you might use questions or questionnaires or surveys. You might engage in a little market research if you have some budget, but if you don't, you can use tools like Moz or SEMrush, Google Trends, to see how people are searching online. You can use Sprout Social or your own Twitter account for an idea of how people are behaving in social. The idea is that you want to be able to provide the types of, you want to know what people are looking for so that then you can drive the content as well as here where you're publishing, all right? And this need not be the biggest number of eyeballs, but it has to be the right eyeballs you have at the right time. So I know most of you are aware of programmatic advertising, where there's an instantaneous bid sell transaction between a publisher and an advertiser that's driven by an algorithm. So they price the space at the price that is most appropriate to the people that you're seeking. And you're also familiar with native advertising, where you have content that's embedded into a place and it looks like content, but it's really sort of a reminder to get to an ad. Well, you can combine the two and look at programmatic native advertising. And it might be something that in this day and age in particular would be interesting for you to pursue. And this all sounds great, but this is where number 2 comes in. And in order for you to know where your content should be placed, you need a sufficient number of consumer archetypes, categories of people. Now, some of you may recognize this graphic. This graphic is from Salesforce.com, but we're a huge customer of Salesforce, and we're so big, in fact, that they allowed me to swipe the graphic. But the idea is that you have to be able to understand whether or not your criteria for segmentation is unique to your business, or whether it's sort of a simple part of a general demographic or psychographic definition. It only needs to be something against which a reasonably large audience can be identified. And if you've never done this before, then please start general. I know so many marketers that spend so much time trying to focus, but don't. Start big. Listen and observe to what the audience is doing, test and adjust how you're executing, and resist the urge to prematurely optimize, because I've dealt with so many product people who are so enamored with their product and the benefits and features of their product that they focus down on an individual. And they say, we want to target people who've stopped using products in our category for the last 30 days. And I say, okay, this is going to get you that guy. That's all it's going to get you. And I say, and by the way, how would you even know that information? Because it's not in the data. And they say, well, we can buy it from a list house. The list house is self-declared. There's nothing wrong with lists, but you have to be mindful of what you're getting. And so it's low quality data, and there's probably not too many records of it. And so it ends up looking a little bit more like this. So instead, you want to look for audiences that have left the category, as well as those who may still be in it, because you want to provide messages so that the audiences can see themselves, as well as potentially some of their friends or loved ones in the narrative. And this is the key to remember in the digital age. Good segmentation doesn't pinpoint, it spreads. When people identify with what you're saying, they help you identify others who should also be hearing your message. Which brings us to coffee, something that my Brazilian brothers and sisters know a lot about. But I'm going to disappoint you, because I'm not really going to talk about coffee. I'm going to talk about Starbucks. I'm not really going to talk about Starbucks, but I'm going to ask a question. How does Starbucks know where to open a new coffee shop? And here's the answer. They use customer lifetime value. And this is something that I've covered in my very first e-commerce Brazil visit. We're going to go into a little bit more detail here, but not too much detail. The math you see will be available in the materials that we provide after the show is over. But I want to walk you through this because it's kind of important. Customer lifetime value. There's a lot of different ways to compute this. Here's the one that I prefer. Average order value times net profit times customer retention rate. Then you take that and you multiply it by the sum of average purchase frequency times average customer life cycle, right? So that's a nice nifty way of doing customer lifetime value in the digital age. But we need 3 more data points. So let's carry that over and look at these other 3. First of all, you need to determine your cost of acquisition. And we'll cover that, we can cover that here, and I can even cover it in a future edition of the magazine. You need to determine your number of new customers required to get to your goal. And that's an important one because you can't just assume everyone's going to spend more. You've got to gain more people. And then finally, you need to go ahead and look at your marketing budget. And your marketing budget number is a pretty easy one to compute. So the other handy acronym that you saw 2 slides ago is RFM. And RFM is comprised of 3 data points. You have recency, you have frequency, and you have monetary value. And so it's relatively straightforward what these things each mean, but I want to take a quick note on frequency. It's an important number, but it's hard to get right. And the reason why it's hard to get right is that people tend to spread out across all these different devices. And so your frequency is dependent upon the consistency that the consumer has with a specific device and visiting you. If they are across a bunch of different devices, 2 or more, which all of us here in this room are, then you have a lesser chance of getting that one right. If I talk to companies and say, do you have one consumer mapped across all their devices? The answers I generally get are somewhere between no and not really. So that's a directional number. Don't focus too much on it, but just use it as a directional guide. So these numbers are fine, and they convey a lot of useful information, but how do you use them? So your first 4 data points are the ones that are the basis for the business case you need to justify the investment you require. We know how much we should spend to get this job done, even if that's not what we have in the budget. And your RFM gives you your contextual criteria. And what do I mean by that? RFM is your way of getting a feel for what's happening online. So if you put your classic retailer's cap on for a second, imagine yourself walking the store. You see the people in the aisles, you see the stock, you see the assortments, you see the regulars, you see the new customers, you're getting the sales figures, and you get a feel for things. And RFM is that way of you getting a feel for how your store is performing in the digital channel. And so by way of a quick soundbite for your senior leadership, data-driven content marketing requires all 7 of these inputs to help you responsibly spend as little as necessary to earn as much as possible. We made it. And I say for Vivian as well, what would my presentation at E-commerce Brazil be without a picture of Ayrton? So let me wrap up with a few points that I think are important for us. As e-commerce professionals, we're accustomed to coexisting with brick and mortar retail. And even if you're a pure play, retail is experiencing a dramatic channel shift toward towards digital. And it brings a lot of challenges along with a lot of opportunities. And the approaches you should focus on that's going to propel your business all start with data. Data will not drive down the rising cost of media, but it will allow you to spend more wisely to get more value from your spend. And we talked about how your media programs needn't be traditional. And you can make your business case for funding them very easily using the math that we discussed. There's a lot of aspects of CRM that will help e-commerce professionals identify who they should be spending money on, because those people will spend money on you. And I want to leave you with this. In my observation, the world of e-commerce really is moving away from the product detail page and the shopping cart. And it's moving further out into the experience of the shopper. And this means the following. We need to have a smarter use of media to be in front of people at the right time. We need to think about applying a lot of the same retention strategies that CRM has leveraged over time. And we need to go to the effort and look through the data to understand which customers will mean more for you over the long term. Because when we meet next time, hopefully, and I will get my hug from Vivian at that point, we should have an even clearer picture of what the future holds. But whatever that future is, it's going to be driven by data, because data really is the new merchandising. And I thank you all very, very much for your time and your attention. I miss all of you. I wish I was there. It's lovely here in Switzerland, but it's always lovelier in Brazil. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. That was tremendous for me. I'm passionate about that data, and I was traveling around your presentation, and I had so many insights and takeaways to build future contents here in Brazil. When you consider basic segmentation, for example,
yes,
what would be the main touch points? And in those touch points, when you're talking about, for example, an omni-channel experience, I buy something online and I go get and collect at the store. What are the main data that that we should collect during those touch points in order to build fidelity with the customer?
Sure. So recency and frequency are the 2 big ones. How often are you ordering this, and how recently have you bought this, and how often do you purchase it? And the reason why that's important is because it gauges for you what the product means for the consumer. And it's not necessarily that a product that is bought more frequently means more. Laundry soap, for instance, doesn't necessarily mean anything to the consumer, but they're buying it all the time. And so as a retailer, if they're in buying this all the time, you should take the opportunity to merchandise for them additional products that might fit in their basket as well. You could consider as well targeted offers to that consumer that both reward their loyalty. I'm going to give you an extra 10% off because you're such a frequent customer, but then I'm going to put in front of you as well a higher profit item that you might be interested in. So you have a lot of opportunities there to not just make sure that you bring it out to their car for them, but that you're actually building a little bit more value into that experience.
And in your opinion, what do you consider the main barriers for the omni-channel experience that we should face from a technological standpoint?
You know what? it's kind of not technological. It's kind of people and process. The omnichannel experience in retail depends upon a retailer and a brand sharing data. And retailers and brands have historically been very, very hesitant to do that because they feel that this is a competitive advantage, and it's not. And the reason why it's not is because a consumer has as much data at their disposal. Actually, they have more data at their disposal than either retailers or brands do. And so a consumer, as I mentioned in one of the earlier slides, when a consumer considers a brand change, that's also a retailer change. And so we have to be mindful that a brand and a retailer need to work together to really continue to win to continue to be important with the relationship with the consumer. And that, I think, is the most important thing. 3 years ago, I could have given you a different answer about the nature of the data transfer between different systems. I just don't think that that's the case anymore. I think it really comes down to business practice. And if we can get past that, I think the consumer will win, but we'll win as well.
And there's another theme that has been treated around the world, especially in e-commerce, which is data privacy. How is Philip Morris, and how is your vision, and how do you foresee these policies entering and changing the way we buy things online?
Sure. So one thing I can say for sure is that Philip Morris, we're a global company. We operate literally everywhere except for China and the US. And the idea is that we apply GDPR standards to data privacy everywhere, even if they don't apply in that particular jurisdiction, we still maintain them. So there are many different ways that you can provide service and provide personalization to a consumer without breaking data privacy rules, and I think more importantly than that, without raising a red flag to the consumer that we know too much. Because we don't need to, we as a brand, brands and retailers don't need to know too much about a consumer. It's sort of like meeting somebody at a party. If there's somebody you're at a party and you meet somebody and they're great, and every time you go back to that person's house for another party, that person's there and they're great, and you find out that this person that you really like is going to be at a different party, you tend to want to go to that party because you like that person. As a brand or as a retailer, you try to be that person that the consumer likes and wants to come back to and will follow, right? And so you don't need a ton of data. You don't need to have a lot of intrusion to do that. Marketers tend to want to hit a bullet with a bullet when it comes to data and when it comes to sort of a godlike control over the consumer. You don't need that. What you need to do is you need to know what to say when and what not to say when to provide something and when to step back and when to just send a note that says hi without a particular call to action. And this is where I think that retailers can start to adopt some of the same strategies and some of the same tactics, I think, that have been with CRM for a while.
Okay, and I would like to thank you very much for the richness of the content, and we wish you all the best from Brazil, and hopefully we'll see you in the future. Okay, thank you very much.
Miss you guys. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.